Esta conferencia comenzará a grabarse.
Very good. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this side event of the 2022 edition of the European Week of Regions and Cities. The title is Cultural Planning for Social Cohesion, and the focus of the event will be on an ongoing collaboration between the municipality of Jerez de la Frontera in the south of Spain and the University of Valencia in particular, but more generally, the partners of the MESOC project, which is the organizer of today's event. MESOC is a EU-funded initiative from Horizon 2020, the European Union's program for research and innovation. It is now in its third year and coming closer to its conclusion. The project was structured according to a continuous interplay between a number of case studies located in several cities of Europe, from the south of Europe, like in the case of Jerez, rather than Athens, we have a representative of the city of Athens, the Agency for ICT, DAEM, seated in our audience today, going up to the north through Milano and then northbound up to Turku in Finland and many other cities that will be mentioned on due time. Today, the focus, as I said, it's on a specific case which is related to the overarching topic of the MESOC project, which is to identify new avenues for both research and practice to understand and possibly predict the social impacts of cultural policies and practices. The focus, as you will soon hear in the case of Jerez, is between the connections of cultural policies and practices on the one hand and the improvements of social cohesion on the other hand. Let's now give a quick overview of the agenda which you have in front of you, and then we will start with the first speaker, and I will introduce him to you. As you can see, now it's 10:13. We will be together until 1 p.m. Today, and there will be no continuation of the discussion in the afternoon. We will have a coffee break, or in any case, a short discussion at 11:20. Despite being late, I would like to propose, late in this start of the workshop, I would like to propose to keep the 11:20 as a target for our break. And so the first three speakers before the break try to reduce by 5 minutes each the timing of your interventions. Then after the break, we will have an online workshop coordinated by the team working in the MESOC project on behalf of the Department of Urban Studies and Architecture of Politecnico di Milano, and this workshop will be a live interaction among all the participants until after the coffee break to be here with us again. And finally, we will have the concluding remarks of the day. We are proud of having the closure of the meeting on two speeches, one from the Deputy Director of Education, Cultural, Heritage, Sports and Leisure at the Spanish Federation of Cities and Provinces, and the very closure by the town councilor for culture of the city of Jerez, who will wrap up the results of the day and bring the live contribution of the city to the outcomes of this workshop. I have already talked too much, as it is my usual. Let me pass the floor right away to our first speaker, Professor Pau Rosell from the University of Valencia, a Concult. He's the coordinator of the MESOC project. He's been a researcher and a methodologist in the area of culture for more than 25 years, and he will bring his perspective not only on what the MESOC project is about, what it has been delivering until today, but also a sort of outlook of the future implications of MESOC research for the domain we are talking about, the domain of cultural studies in general. So Pau, thanks for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Francesco. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm going to make a very, very fast overview on our project because, well, most of us are members of the consortium, so there is no need to go very, very deep about explaining the project. And I am going to try to show how we make some advances in this relationship between social cohesion and the research of the MESOC project. So, well, as you know, everyone, the MESOC projects are research and innovation action. That means that we have to make research, but also to be innovative in the procedures, in the ways to make the research, and that we have to apply the research in a very innovative way. So, which was the challenge? They asked us to find new perspective in the measuring, new perspective, new methodologies in measuring, or at least in the approach to the social impact of culture, and going a little far or a little beyond the economic impact. And we have to do that in an innovative way. This is more or less the question that the call posed to us at the beginning of the project. Well, we have to say that this is not the only project to answer this call, and that we have 3 sister projects. That is the project Invent, Uncharted, and we, MESOC. The Invent project tried to make some kind of social turn in the cultural policies. The Uncharted will identify the diversity of views about the culture concepts and the specific specificities of the production of cultural services and goods in Europe. That is a very challenging question. And we are more oriented to try to measure in some way these societal impacts of culture. So, for doing that, we plan a journey, and we had some milestones, but it's very important to say that we defined precisely 3 specific phases. This is a brainstorming phase, a convergent phase, and a broadening phase. We are now beginning this broadening phase. In fact, we can say that this event is part of this process, no? Then now after
sorry, Pau. We are still on slide 3. Okay, now it's slide 4. Sorry.
Okay. Then we after this brainstorming phase, because we have to say that this is not a very conventional view of culture, and then we need to share between us different perspectives, different views. We put all these views in a process of convergence. Then we produce some kind of shared model, and now we are applying this model, and we are broadening and making the dissemination of the process. Well, we are interested in, well, in one side we have cultural experience, cultural programs, cultural projects, and at the end we have impacts. We know that this happens, but we don't know very well what is in the middle, in this kind of black box. So we use a kind of theory of change, and we're interested in what happens in this intermediate process. So we want to anticipate through some transitional variables the social impacts, and to know or to predict if they are going to occur or not. So we focus our view in this intermediate process. So we have to develop some kind of model explaining which is the path between the cultural project, the cultural program, the cultural experience, and the societal impacts. And we work with this theory of change. What we have been doing, because in all this process, well, as any research, we make some kind of desk research, and we have analyzed more than 1,500 academic documents and more than 400 of gray literature in this process and in different parts of the projects. Now we are extending this desk research about the gender approach of the societal impact. So we approach with a very conventional view this desk research, but knowing and presenting which is the state of the art in the question. Of course, we ask the experts through many interviews and Delphi exercise. We have interviewed dozens of experts and stakeholders, especially the team of the University of Barcelona, who has prepared a very detailed and precise Delphi of the process, asking to the experts which it or how is this process occurring, how from a cultural project we arrive to a societal impacts, and which are the variables, the conditioners, the process that should occur to maximize or to increase these societal impacts. We have analyzed concrete experience in concrete cities for concrete sectors and looking for concrete impacts. So dozens of cases studied in detail especially by the team of the University of Milano, and with the help of all the cities that are partners in the project, and with a special contribution of these cities that can bring their own and concrete experience in this case. Well, we have co-create between the interaction inside the consortium, but also interacting with the external agents and the external information. So we have a lot of meetings to debate, virtual meetings, physical meetings. Well, we have to say that we advance a lot when we use a presential meeting. So, but we debate and we discuss very deeply of all these concepts in this process. Well, we extract from this desk research, we extract relevant variables from the state of the art, and through these techniques of semantic analysis that are developed by the team of the University of Rijeka. And then there are a lot of hours of coding and designing the toolkit that try to give some order between impacts and sectors in the analysis, in the classification of the academic and gray literature. Well, we use artificial intelligence techniques to establish causal relationships between relevant variables, also in micro approach, and also with some other tools trying to identify these transitional variables that are in the middle of this process of between the projects and the impacts. Well, we have applied these conceptual results in real cultural planning processes, like is the case of Jerez, where inspired in the MESOC approach, we make a process of cultural planning in Jerez. So we have tested the model that explains how the impact of individuals in the participation of cultural events is builded, if is raised up. So and we now have more information about the micro components of cultural impacts in events. And we, of course, we have reviewed all official and unofficial ways of quantifying, measuring aspect of culture, and we have paid special attention how gender difference are measured. And of course, we have talked, discussed, shared, published, participated in meetings, in Congress, so as you can follow in the web of the project. So, what about the question that we are dealing with today about cultural, social cohesion, civic engagement, and participation? We can say that, well, in some approach that is like a black box, so we know that a cultural experience modifying our creativity, openness in the process of symbolic value generation, generating new ideas through the emotions, through participation, through the use of memory. So there is a very, very complex process that is combined in a kind of black box, and then we know that this process has, and we can measure it, economic impacts and impacts that goes beyond the economic impacts that are in the field of the social cohesion, civic engagement, and so on. So we can assess that this is true. Well, what we have learned in this process? Well, we have a model, then we can, it depends on the different cultural project, cultural programs, cultural planning, cultural policies, that we can follow different paths and different ways to provoke the impacts, and there are very complicated and very sophisticated paths that, as we can see in this slide. So this is the red line could be, this is a simulation, this is not a real approach, but could be, but there are also could be very direct impacts. So in each process, in each experience, we can identify with this model more or less how the path goes. Looking at that and analyzing so many projects, so we can see that we know that that for every project the model is, we can say, modulated to a large extent by the variables of the specific context. So it's not easy to make a general assessment, general affirmation. So, but there is no doubt that there is a social effect related to social cohesion and civic engagement, and we are testing methods to measure them. What we learn for this process? Well, at micro level, we identify that identity and sense of belonging contribute significantly to the construction of satisfaction in participation or with participation in cultural events, and then to the generation of impacts on individuals. So this change of social changes is an aggregation of individual changes. We can identify numerous trajectories between the cultural project, cultural programs, and the transformation of social cohesion. And for that, we try, or we are going now, we are now planning to make some kind of handbook on how to maximize these societal impacts through some general or specific recommendation about cultural projects because we have a lot of information. And of course, we know that there is a big amount of academic and great literature that link cultural participation and different and cultural dimensions of social cohesion. At meso level, we can say that we have learned that it's possible to measure the carrying capacity of cultural and creative sectors in terms of inclusion, cohesion, and diversity. And we will see an example in the presentation of Tony Murphy. We know that it's feasible to develop urban indicators to measure the social cohesion derived from cultural activities, and we will see an example of the Federation of Spanish Municipalities and Province that try to measure or to build some indicators to evaluate the local cultural policies, and we will see an example. Of course, there are a lot of urban paths to social cohesion, and we will see that in the presentation of the team of Milano. And we can say that it's possible to apply this goal of social cohesion in a specific and urban cultural planning, as we will see with the presentation of Chema Segovia. And then at macro level, that we know that there is a causal relationship between the dimension of the cultural and creative sectors and, for instance, some variables related to social cohesion, that is political participation and the sense of community. And so this is the work of Jordi San Juan that is measuring how an increase in 1 point of members or workers in the cultural and creative sector could affect to the civic engagement measured as political participation in elections. So we have the model. We know that the cultural and creative sectors is a very important variable, and we know we can measure for each region in Europe which will be the impact if we increase in 1 point the proportion of people working in the cultural and creative sector. So there are very impressive results, and so we can in somewhere measure and anticipate and predict the impact of the cultural and creative sector. And that's all from my side. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pau. We are almost catching up, so it's good for my role, which is to keep you focused on timing. But let me ask you something before we pass to the next speaker.
Of course.
As you know, I am just a practitioner. I have some interests in culture and cultural policies, but more from the outside than the inside of the researcher community. So I'm very curious to hear from you, based on your experience, how innovative MESOC can be considered external observer who differently than in my case may be knowledgeable about the way cultural studies have been carried out until today. What are the main outputs or outcomes of this project that could be taken stock of by other researchers belonging to this community but not belonging to the MESOC project? Thank you.
Well, I think that a differential approach is that we try, of course, we use qualitative information, and we make very deep qualitative analysis through the Delphi, through the case analysis, and so on. But our goal at the end is try to measure in some way that means to translate into quantitative approach and to convert this we can say feelings, views of this process in more or less a quantitative approach. And then we use so we'll use semantic analysis that is not very usual in cultural studies in this sense. We use artificial intelligence. We use more econometric statistics approach, and then we can say that this is difference between other more, we can say, more conventional approach about the impacts on culture, because really this is a demand of the call. We want to have some data evidence of what we are saying, that we are imagining about this relationship between cultural activities and the societal impact. So I would say that this more quantitative approach is the difference between the MESOC project and other more, we can say, more traditional approaches to the problem.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pau. It sounds convincing to me. Now let me pass the floor to the next speaker, Chema Segovia. Chema Segovia from Valencia is an architect, an urbanist, a professional in the domain, and as announced in today's agenda, he led a team of experts who drafted very recently a cultural plan of the city of Jerez, the protagonist of today's workshop. So my invitation to Chema is to stay within, let's say, minutes max, so that we can also leave room for at least one question. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Francesco. Well, as Francesco said, no, my name is Chema Segovia, and I'm part of Culturalink, which is the consultancy company in charge of elaborating the culture and creativity strategic plan of Jerez, no? Which is the thing in which I will focus the attention during the next 25 minutes. During my presentation, I will refer to this plan or this strategy as the PEC, no? Which is its acronym in Spanish. And well, the first thing that deserves to be mentioning when talking about the PEC is that since the beginning of its elaboration, we have been involved in the MESOC project. No? Francesco and Pau have already mentioned this. Jerez is acting as a pilot city for MESOC, and the collaboration with this project provided us with a very valuable framework that helped to shape the strategy. No? In a while, when I show you the strategic matrix of the PEC, you will clearly see the relationship between both projects. Well, by now we have been working for more than a year, and we have fulfilled 4 main tasks. No? When we started working on the PEC, we developed an exhaustive analysis of the context in which the plan will act. After that, or on the basis of that diagnosis, we designed the PEC, no? Its guidelines and the proposals that will lead its implementation. One important thing, no, since the beginning of our project, we thought that the PEC shouldn't be a simple intellectual exercise, no, waiting for practical action to come afterwards. The PEC wants to boost a complex process, no, and that kind of process needs a kind of support that is to be constructed patiently, no. And according to this philosophy, we have celebrated different public presentations, we have done different workshops, we have improved the relationship between the municipality of Jerez and the local cultural community, and we have also helped Jerez to join different networks of European projects. And finally, no, we have also designed the Cultural Observatory of Jerez, no, which is a tool that will offer evidence-based overviews of the local cultural policies. No? This cultural observatory is also directly inspired in the MESOC project and in the work done by the Spanish Federation of Local Authorities, no? Which will be presented later in the morning. Now, I will focus the rest of my presentation in these 2 things. No? I will begin sharing with you some of the main conclusions of that initial analysis, and after that, I will tell you about the logic and the structure of the PEC. So, well, let's talk about the context, no, in which the PEC will act. Let's talk about Jerez. Jerez is a city located in Andalusia, which is a region in the south of Spain. Well, Jerez has more or less 230,000 inhabitants. No, that well, in comparison with the average dimension of Spanish cities, is a considerable amount. No? But Jerez, what makes Jerez an important urban area are not only the quantitative factors, let's say. No? Jerez has also a lot of like specific issues, no? Distinctive features that are the things that we try to unveil with our analysis. No? For analyzing this reality, we employed a diverse but integrated methodology that paid attention to three main items. The first of them was the territory of Jerez. After that, we studied the local creative ecosystem, and finally, we also tried to understand the role that the municipal government plays in that complex ecosystem. No? And as I said, now I will share with you some of the conclusions of this analysis, highlighting 5 distinctive features of Jerez. No? The first thing that is really interesting, no, is that during history, Jerez has shown a very, very strong capacity to reinvent itself creatively. No? Being, well, the transformation that happened in the early 20th century, one of the most innovative, deep, and also successful. No? In this moment, the transformation that Jerez went through was provoked by the industrialization of wine production, and well, this process completely reshaped the economy of Jerez, but also its social and economic and cultural dimension. No? The impacts of this transformation can be felt nowadays, no? And to give you an example about this, we could talk about the wine cellars. No? These wine cellars are big architectural complexes that are spread all over the city. At the same time, no, they are directly linked to the rural environment. And well, as I said, no, they are all over the city, and they function as symbolic landmarks of the neighborhoods they are part of. And one interesting thing about these wine cellars is that they combine many different functions. The most important of them is the storage of wine, but in these wine cellars also function as shops. You can go there with your empty bottle and buy a couple of liters of wine. They are also open to public visit. They regularly host cultural performances, mainly related with music. And these wine cellars are also very prone to participate in cultural events that happens in Jerez. No? So we can talk about these wine cellars as important cultural agents in the city. Then, well, a second distinctive feature of Jerez, very related with the first one, is that this successive urban transformation produced a very rich and diverse urban environment. I have already mentioned the wine cellars, but we could also speak about enormous quantity of religious architecture. In fact, religion is another very important cultural element in Jerez, no? Being Easter and Christmas, two of the most important festivities in the city. Jerez has a very vibrant public space, but they also have big quantity of parks, green areas. The relationship between the city and its surrounding territory is very narrow, so this is another important element. As I mentioned, the surroundings of Jerez are a vast territory, which is related with architecture, and it also hosts a very varied heritage. Jerez has also different contemporary elements, no? Like, for example, the university. And finally, it's also interesting to mention many traditional neighborhoods that has a very strong sense of identity. During our analysis, we developed an exhaustive mapping exercise, paying attention to each neighborhood of the city. We finally counted more than 200 of these urban cultural resources, studying their distribution and their characteristics. The third feature, the third distinctive feature of Jerez would be that the city has three really powerful symbolic pillars, no? Which are flamenco, wines, and horses. No? These three elements are very integrated in the imaginary of the city, no? And also in its day-by-day life. But it's also interesting, no, that these three elements are, or can be considered, no, that they are universally recognized. No? When you talk about flamenco, wines, and horses, almost everybody, no, receive some images and meanings and so on. No? So that connection between the local and the universal is also has also a big potential. Jerez has a very dense local cultural ecosystem, which is, let's say, structured around those three symbolic pillars, no? Flamenco, wines, and horses. But this cultural ecosystem goes beyond those three elements. No? During the analysis, we developed a municipal inventory counting 270 cultural initiatives in Jerez. We also analyzed their relationships, no, and their economic behavior. And it was interesting, for example, to discover a strong presence of schools and academies related with art and culture. This kind of specialization has to do with flamenco, no? Because there are a lot of places where you can learn how to play the guitar or how to dance. But as I mentioned before, no, these schools and academies goes beyond flamenco, no? And they discover a strong potential for fostering cultural participation, civic engagement, social cohesion, etc. And finally, no, as I said before, we also studied the local, no, the municipal government, and specifically the structure, no, of management and development of the municipal cultural policies. And we discovered, not surprisingly, because this is a very, it's like a common situation, that, well, creativity, multi-actor governance, and increasing the levels of instrumental rationality were the three main challenges for, well, the local government, no, and specifically for their municipal cultural policies of Jerez. It's also important to mention that among the cultural projects of the municipality of Jerez, innovative initiatives can be found. No? And for example, we could mention Criatura, which is an international festival, an international flamenco festival, very innovative, which combines or merges education, multiculturality, creative capacitation, no? And it's a project focused on children. No? And these kind of experiences are important, no? Because they show that opening new fields of action is possible. No, they are already doing interesting things. No? So these kind of experiences are really inspiring. I have done a brief description of the context of Jerez, no, and the context in which the PEC will act. Now I will talk to you about the PEC as a cultural planning tool. Well, the PEC uses a particular approach to cultural planning tool that is the result, no, of the accumulative experience of Cultural Inc. During several years, we have done different strategies or projects, no, similar to this one. And well, this approach could be defined as planning for uncertainty. No? When we talk about uncertainty, we understand this uncertainty from two different points of view. No? The first of them is understanding that cultural cities are like unstable fields of unstable chemistry. No? And for acting in them, we need more evidence-based information. No? That's why the MEXOC project was interesting for us, and at the same time we need to accept risk, no, and the possibility of failure. And then there is a general uncertainty that has to do with this permanent crisis, no, we are suffering, which affects in a specific way to the European context and to the local scale. So the planning logic that the PEC employs is not based, let's say, no, on a desirable future. No, we are in point A and we want to go to this marvelous point B, no, without knowing how to do it. But no, the planning logic of the PEC is based on moving towards a desired direction, no, knowing that the journey will be uncertain, no, as I said. So, well, no, for doing that, we think that we need to combine two different kinds of approaches, no? One that has to do with strategy, one that has to do with tactics. And these two elements are provided by the two elements, no, that configure the PEC, which are the strategic matrix that introduces that strategical approach, and the repository of ideas, no, which introduces that tactical attitude. And now in the last part of my presentation, I will briefly talk about these two elements. Well, the strategic matrix of the PEC is the compass that points the direction of travel. No? This strategic matrix is defined by the intersection between three fields of impact for cultural policies and three lines of actions specifically defined for Jerez. No? The three fields of impact for cultural policies are directly extracted from the MEXOC project and are cultural rights, economic development and urban regeneration, and social cohesion and civic engagement. And the three lines of actions that, as I said, no, they are contextualized and they are based on our initial analysis, are reactivating physical and symbolical cultural resources, no, that the city of Jerez has, to promote creative recombination around the three symbolic pillars of the city, no, flamenco, wines, and horses, and to reinforce and to densify the local cultural ecosystem of Jerez. No? As I said, the intersection of these 6 elements define the strategic matrix that, as you can see, it contains a good amount of information. In fact, this strategic matrix provides with specific guidelines to define the specific objectives of the projects and initiatives that the PEC will impulse. But there is another important function of this strategic matrix. This strategic matrix also works as a bingo card. No? During the implementation, the strategic matrix will inform us where the impacts of the projects and the measures that are implemented, where those impacts are located, and also where are the gaps that need stronger attention. And as I said, we have the strategic matrix, and then the repository of ideas established with it like a complementary relationship. The repository of ideas is just a set of 35 proposals for municipal cultural policies that are defined to work on the direction marked by the strategic matrix. Well, these 35 proposals of cultural projects, of cultural policies, are organized in 3 different categories according their executive complexity and their transformative potential. And well, the thing is that the important thing is that these 35 proposals are to be understood as a box full of tools, tools that will be selected and used according the opportunities and the necessities that the PEC will find during its implementation. So the 35 proposals are not thought to be implemented, and different selections and combinations are to be expected. And the implementation process of the PEC is open to different developments, no, and different materializations. For not getting lost and not working without guidance, we defined different scenarios and different indices, no, to control, no, the implementation process of the PEC. And well, no, in this point, the Cultural Observatory will be a basic tool. And also, no, an important thing, no, a thing that needs to be stressed is that those 35 proposals has an overall logic, that is represented in this diagram. As you can see, the different proposals define different working packages and establish different relationships with them. This is important, because this kind of overall logic guarantees a good amount of comprehensiveness, let's say, for almost every selection of proposals. So this is important. And to conclude my presentation, I will just explain, I will focus the attention on the upper part of this diagram, because this is the part of the diagram where the proposals that has to do with social cohesion are located. And also, like mentioning some of them will help you to have a clearer idea of the kind of proposals, and measures that the PECs include. Well, the first proposal, that deserves to be highlighted is E4. That you can see, there in the diagram. I think that you don't see my cursor, but this proposal E4 is located right on the center of the diagram, and well, it is based now. Jerez is running to become the European Capital of Culture 2023. And we think that the construction of the candidacy can be understood as a process to give public visibility to the importance of creativity, to generate a shared community vision, and to foster civic participation. That's why this proposal is structural and is placed in the center of the diagram. Then, right above this proposal, we find E7, which is also an important proposal because it will nurture the candidacy of Jerez to become European Capital of Culture. And E7 proposed using the landscape of Jerez as a creative laboratory for sustainability. This proposal will be developed in the framework of the Palisades project, which is an H2020 project that will begin next year, and it's a good opportunity, a wonderful opportunity to impulse the development of the PEC. Then we have two different packages. On the left part of your screen, you can see one that is colored in cyan. That work package has to do with creativity and hybridation, and one of the most important proposals there is E5, which proposes the creation of a small cultural infrastructure, which will be located in the historic center of Jerez. In fact, it will be located in an old house that right now is being refurbished. And well, this small public infrastructure will help to dynamize the system of cultural, the public system of cultural facilities, and it will be a space focused on, will be a co-managed space focused in promoting cultural governance and civic participation around culture. And then finally, on the right part of your screen, there is another work package that has to do with well-being and social inclusion. And there we have, for example, a measure that tries to promote amateurism, making the most of those local art schools that are located in Jerez. And also, well, another proposals that try to act on certain barriers to cultural participation related with gender, age, or income. And to very briefly sum up, and very briefly, we can say that thanks to the PEC, now Jerez has a cultural planning tool that is based on a solid local analysis, a local analysis that was performed on a cultural perspective. Then thanks to the PEC, Jerez has also an elastic but highly detailed instrument for the definition of the municipal cultural policies, an instrument that promotes innovation and also seeks to increase the levels of instrumental rationality of the municipal cultural policies. And finally, and above all, with the PEC, Jerez has developed a public policy initiative that helps to introduce a wider comprehension of the importance of culture and creativity for our cities and regions nowadays. So that's all. I hope you find this presentation interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chema. Very interesting indeed. I guess it would deserve another workshop dedicated to it. But for the sake of this workshop, I would like to ask you to summarize in few sentences the contents, the very diverse and rich contents that you have been presenting this morning to us. What are, in your opinion, the replicable aspects of and methodology and the way to highlight the connections between the local conditions and the plans to reach higher aims in terms of policy making connected with the cultural resources that exist in a city? We are in a European workshop. So what can other cities learn from your experience which they could replicate in their own, of course, different local policy environments? Thank you.
Okay, well, this is a very interesting question, and I think that from the perspective of other cities, and the possibilities of the PEC regarding replication, well, the first thing, I think that the PEC could function as an outline, let's say, or as a template, not as a blueprint, this is important, but as I said, like as an outline to define other cultural planning tools. As I mentioned, the PEC is based on very long experience, a very rich accumulated experience. We have employed the methodology of the PEC several times, in trying to improve it every time we have the chance. So there is like an interesting methodology that could be replicated. And at the same time, this is even more important, the PEC provides also an interesting, let's say, epistemological framework, that, as I mentioned, structured and articulated comprehension of the role of culture in our cities and regions. This thing, as I have already said, is also in depth with the MESOC project. There is an important thing to be highlighted. This kind of, it's also very evident, this kind of cultural planning exercises must be contextualized. This is like, I also insisted in this thing during my presentation, highlighting the importance of that initial analysis. And well, finally, another thing that deserves to be mentioned is that the PEC is also, I said, that is based on the accumulated experience of Culturalink, but is also nurtured with the inspiration and of many references and many people that had worked before together with us, in the meanwhile, etc. So the people from the Spanish Federation of Local Authorities and many cultural planning examples and projects that we have studied from the in this process. So the MESOC, the PEC is fruit of some kind of shared intelligence process, that can still be development. And I think this is how this cultural planning instrument should be understood. Did I answer your question, Francesco?
To some extent, but I need myself to digest all the concepts that you put forward today. Anyway, congratulations also from my side, but I see messages on the chat aligned with this feeling that I have. So let me now pass the floor to our next speaker, the last before our break. Tony Murphy is the CEO of Cultural Link, a consultancy, a Spanish consultancy based in Las Palmas, the Canary Islands, and Valencia too. As the topic of our workshop is cultural planning for social cohesion, we should never forget that integration of marginal or marginalized social groups is part and parcel of our strive for social cohesion. And contents of the talk by Tony today is related to an interesting initiative, actually a study of employment opportunities for disabled people that his consultancy has carried out for the Madrid community, together with a charity, Plena Inclusión, in Madrid as well. So I would like to ask you, Tony, to present your case, bearing in mind that you have about 15 minutes for your presentation, and if time allows, I will make a question to you at the end of it, as I did for the other speakers. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Francesco, and good morning. The work I'm presenting today is an update of a study carried out in 2019 by Cultural Link for Plena Inclusión Madrid, which is not a charity, it is an association of people with intellectual or developmental disabilities. The aim of the study was to approach the potential of the cultural and creative sectors as a source of employment for people with intellectual or developmental disabilities in the region of Madrid, or if you prefer, the autonomous community of Madrid. The relationship between the cultural and creative sectors and people with disabilities has until now been approached mainly from the perspective of ensuring access as users or consumers. But the field of culture and creativity is rarely considered as a potential niche for labor inclusion and professional development for people with functional and cognitive diversity. The study presents a first panoramic exploration trying to identify the employment opportunities for people with intellectual disabilities in the cultural and creative sectors of the community of Madrid, a sector of economic activity which, despite the successive crises intertwined in the second decade of this century, is experiencing a very intense growth rate and accounts for a not inconsiderable 9.3% of total employment in this autonomous Spanish community. But before addressing some of the specific details of the study, allow me to make a few comments to underpin the wisdom, in our opinion, of directing an employment inclusion strategy towards sectors of economic activity related to culture and creativity. Some of these considerations will be of a structural nature, and one, if you like, would be will have a more cyclical dimension. In relation to the former, and independently of any other weighty consideration related to the importance of the symbolic dimension in the articulation of inclusive and democratic societies, there are solid arguments about the relevance of choosing cultural and creative activities as a strategy for social and labor insertion. I will mention 4 of them. Firstly, culture is a factor of growing demand. Evidence shows that in areas of economic growth, the demand for goods and services in the culture and the arts is increasing. The reason for this phenomena are related to long-term trends that will persist in the future and are related to the following: the increase in training in general terms, the consideration of culture as a superior good, which implies that higher income levels activate higher demand, the increase in leisure time, also in general terms, changes in demographic and social structures, and the introduction of ICTs, which allow for new models of cultural production, distribution, and consumption. All these reasons point to the fact that culture is an emerging sector and that most products and services are far from being considered mature products. Therefore, if you allow me a first provisional conclusion, orientating a job placement policy towards a growing sector of economic activity makes all the sense in the world. Secondly, the culture and creativity sector is labor intensive. The specific characteristics of production, distribution, and consumption and conservation of cultural goods and services make the substitution of capital goods for labor complicated. Second, this is especially so in activities of human performance, such as the performing arts, where productive improvements are impossible from the substitution of labor by other productive factors. If an average company in all activities in Spain employs between 3.5 and 4 workers, in the productive field of culture and creativity and leisure, this ratio is between 4.5 and 6 workers. These are pre-pandemic figures. In other words, from the perspective of the interests of a social group, such as the one that we are attending today, as I say, from the perspective of the interests of a social group in which unemployment is a structural problem, invested in the cultural and creative sectors can be a successful strategy. Thirdly, working in the cultural sector leads to higher levels of job satisfaction than in the economy as a whole. Studies seem to show that working in the cultural sector provokes some kind of psychological compensation that derives from the fact that despite having objectively worse working conditions than the average worker, they show higher levels of job satisfaction than the average employed person. The facts that could be easily understandable for occupations most closely linked to the expression of creativity, however, also extends to management functions, or even to more auxiliary and technical jobs such as camera persons, unloaders, exhibition installers, among others. Thus, we can venture a third provisional conclusion. It is clear that if there is the possibility of choosing from a range of job specialization alternatives, it is more reasonable to choose those options that convey higher levels of satisfaction. Fourth and last structural argument. The cultural sector is not in general a predator of environment. It does not widely generate waste, and it also makes relocation considerably more difficult. At a time when the relationship between human beings and their natural environment is a concern, opting for a work insertion program linked to culture and creativity can be an attractive alternative to other more harmful or toxic options, while at the same time allowing the organization that promotes these kinds of strategies to align with the priorities of the recovery and resilience plans of the main regional, national, European, and international institutions. One final fact, of a more, as I said, cyclical nature, but equally relevant to the issue at hand. After the devastating devastating housing and financial crisis of 2008, employment in the cultural and creativity sector performed significantly better than the average of the economy. In Spain, by 2013, in most of the cultural subsectors, employment had recovered or even surpassed the 2008 figures, thus describing a sector of proven resilience in the face of crisis. Obviously, the pandemic has curtailed that process, but despite the inevitable provisionality in which we still have to move, there are positive signs that the organization and companies of the cultural and creativity sector that experienced and survived the previous crisis are once again showing signs of representing a dynamic source of employment. Having said this, let's go directly to the study. The objective of the project is unambiguous: to analyze the potential of the cultural and creative sectors as a source of employment for people with intellectual or developmental disabilities in the region of Madrid, and to provide guidelines and measures for their effective incorporation into the labour market. The logic of the project is represented by this following line. First, analysis of the cultural and creative sectors in the autonomous community of Madrid. Second, identification of the professions that are developed in the cultural and creative sectors. Thirdly, identification of a framework for connecting people and professions. Fourth, design of a training actions. Fifth, the design of Emplea Cultura application. And sixth, an update, a post-pandemic update of the initial research. Due to time constraints, I will focus the rest of my presentation on the first four milestones. Firstly, we carried out a research on the dynamics of the cultural and creative sectors in the autonomous community of Madrid, based on the analysis of social security data, and we also estimated the potential for growth in the coming years. In order to carry out this research, we have analyzed those CNAE 2009 codes. This is the National Code of Economic Activities that correspond to the standard classifications of the cultural and creative sectors in Spain. The results of this analysis confirm, as I have already anticipated, that the rate of growth of employment in the cultural and creative sectors exceeds the average for the economy in the region of Madrid, demonstrating that this is a sector that should be taken into account when assessing employment opportunities for any segment of the population. Overall, employment in the cultural and creative sectors in the autonomous community of Madrid has experienced, as of 2014, a very intense rate of growth and accounts, as I have also mentioned, for 9.3% of total employment. Secondly, after the analysis by sectors, we tried to identify a broad catalogue of professions that are actually carried out in each of the sectors covered in our research. The aim was to identify all the potential occupations that could be developed in the sector considered. The results have been the identification of 10 sectors of activity and 40 types of companies and organizations. Subsequently, we have isolated the professions that make up the list of jobs in these companies and organizations, trying to match them as closely as possible to the different organization catalogues. To this end, we made an effort to find suitable correspondences between the cataloguing of the efficient taxonomies of the National Code of Occupations and the Public Employment Service employment system. To complete the elaboration, we have used other sources, less standardized but equally relevant from a practical purpose, ranging from the reviewing of job posts of different organizations to direct and telematic consultations with the heads of companies and institutions. At this point, the question we intended to formulate, and which is at the heart of the research, is whether, in general, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities could be incorporated into professional careers in these fields and companies, either by identifying those niches of activities where their abilities can be exploited or maximized, or by identifying which training processes and which accessibility measures need to be implemented to compensate for existing restrictions. The result has been the identification for more than 450 possible professions in the cultural and creative sectors, classified by growth, potential, and required skills, which, as we shall see, allows for the assessment of job possibilities in the cultural and creative sectors based on an analysis of the capabilities and skills of each individual. A conceptual framework is then developed in order to establish what could be described as a